Hi, this is Scott Park Phillips talking with Ed Hines in Paris to Boulder, Colorado.
Hello, Boulder.
And, well, I'm not entirely sure what we're going to talk about because we both are Bagua practitioners for sure, and we both are in the broader movement culture thing, and we've both written books. And I'm really hoping to talk a lot about my book because that's the kind of egomaniac I am. No, because I'm really excited about it, actually.
I haven't got a new book coming out, so what can I say? I'll talk about your book.
Awesome. So I actually thought that I would start with one concept about a concept, a meta idea, which is that a lot of times in natural language, I'll drop in, most people will drop into analogies. When you're trying to go from what someone's conception is or what someone's preconception is to the claim you're making.
Yeah.
And you're like, I got to get the other person to make that jump from preconception to claim so that we can evaluate the claim. And if they can't make the jump, then I'm like, well, let's try an analogy, and analogies work like if you've never seen a shower and I'm like, it's like an indoor waterfall. Like, oh, but it's not, it's really not an indoor waterfall. It's just not. Analogies are terrible, but it gets you over that hump, so that
it does require a degree of willingness on the part of the listener. I know that one of the things I've struggled with recently in internet conversations is making an analogy. People ignore it, keep going on the thing that they've been ranting about or complaining about. So,
yeah, and so that's basically what I want to say. In the world of the internet, I very often find myself in this problem with preconception to claim, and that gap doesn't get crossed. And so so the claim doesn't get evaluated. like I could critique my own claim, but if you don't get what it is, all I'm going to do is keep trying to make it. Anyway, I thought that would be a good place to start, just because if you catch me making an analogy, stop me. Let's get to the idea.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Now I understand why you said that. Okay, good.
So what should we start with? How about you start?
I'm going to start by saying, if I don't know what I'm talking about, or if I go, the conversation is running low, then I'm going to do my best to take a devil's advocate role to the people who don't like your book.
Awesome.
I think that always will give me something to...
that's fair.
to talk about. I do generally like your books, in fact, and there are things which I go, really? But on the other hand, for me, it seems like there's a logic and a level of research which can't really be dismissed too easily. So,
just so everyone knows, that's the book.
That's the book.
That's me at the bottom. All right, you want to ask a question?
If people don't know your book, I can just throw this one out because I was thinking about it under the waterfall or in the shower before I got ready for this conversation.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you possibly put people off in your book is by saying things like, everyone in China knew that at the time.
Yeah.
And I've got to go back a bit. So what you're saying is, in the book, that Chinese martial arts were inseparable from religious and theatrical traditions, because theatrical traditions were effectively religion. And we've lost that because that was too strange, too complicated, and at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, all of that became purified, and we had this more rational understanding of what Chinese martial arts are. In your book, you give lots of examples of how theatre and martial arts were intertwined. And if you're not a martial artist, those kinds of examples will just be completely invisible to you, which was what I liked about reading your book. Was there was a whole other world related to the martial arts, which I've spent more than half my life, 3/4 of my life actually practicing, which I knew almost nothing about. Almost nothing. Like, I knew there was Chinese opera, but I always assumed it was kind of just opera, squeaky voices and a bit of acrobatics. Anyway, so you make these claims, and there's one particular which jumped out at me under the waterfall, which is everyone in China knew that, and that was, you'll have to remind me, the story of someone who subdues demons by getting them to cultivate in their lower dantians.
Yes, the not someone, Xuan Wu, the mysterious warrior. That's actually in the Tai Chi section.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, so what you just pointed to, right, is this fundamental problem with discussing the Chinese martial arts, is that every book published on the subject before my book is subject to this concept I call the YMCA consensus, which arose in the aftermath of the Boxer uprising. And I call it the YMCA consensus because the YMCA, at least in the United States, not so much in Europe, but in the United States, is a really well-known organization. It's known for being, to put it in casual language, spiritual, not religious. It's an organization, it's a very well-formed organization that evolved out of what were called secret societies in the West, the Masons, Freemasons, the Elks, those sorts of things, as a very public organization, which had the goal of integrating different classes through religion and exercise. And it became, and it's the best example of muscular Christianity. This idea that through the physical body we can attain clean, sin-free living.
Yes.
Kind of idea. And this idea was what was exported to China. And so the entire generation of leaders in the early 20th century, after 1912, the entire generation of new leaders all came through versions of the YMCA consensus. And this was used, it was ferociously anti-religion, anti-Chinese religion, and anti-theater. And it originally was anti-martial arts until it came up with the idea that you could repackage martial arts as muscular Christianity, as it were. Even though they weren't necessarily Christians, sometimes they were Buddhists, they were other things, they were framing their religion from a Christian point of view. And if you don't understand this up front, it's super hard to understand what it is I'm talking about before that happened. And so when I say something like everybody knew this, I am talking about the period before that massive purification, separation of theater, religion, and martial skills happened, which is a historical fact. And so now to that specific question, there's a play called Journey to the North, which is about the god Xuanwu, the mysterious warrior, who is partly known in the West as the person that Zhang Sanfeng, the immortal person, the god that the immortal Zhang Sanfeng dreamed of. And Xuanwu, Xuan means mysterious or dark, and Wu means martial. And that's actually his name. And he becomes Zhenwu, the perfected warrior. And this is deeply tied up in the history of Taoism. I could just talk for an hour about this. But the book itself is called Journey to the North, is his life, which starts out with just him having rebirth after rebirth. Oh, okay, it starts off, he's the Jade Emperor, and one of his three souls, goes to Earth because the soul itself covets a beautiful object, a vase, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and then gets stuck on Earth and has to go through this rebirth process. I think it's 72 rebirths until he reaches enlightenment, basically, through the Golden Elixir practice. And then the next part, there's another part of him. He also embodies the 36 thunder gods, who are all demons, who are used, in a sense, in Chinese cosmology to organize militias. So they're deeply connected to martial arts.
Yes.
And that there's all sorts of rituals that involve them, but anyway, in the story, he puts the Golden Elixir in each one of them, one by one, in order to subdue them. So he gets them to cultivate the elixir inside, which is how and makes them his slaves, basically, because he gets them.
So exactly, that's perfect. That's where I wanted to
that's the setup.
So that's a setup. So it's I'll go back to one of the claims next. But what I was thinking was, you talk about, this whole cultivation of the Dantian thing, it's clearly how you make a slave. It's not how you become enlightened.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's basically using that as a way to reintegrate parts of himself. He's going, okay, demon.
Right.
Now become part of me. So
there's a reversal there.
Contradict the practice of using cultivation in your lower Dantian as a way of subduing and bringing back unruly parts of your mind?
A brilliant analysis, and I totally agree. Yes, that's there too. So both are true, right? And we can talk deep. We can dive into the Golden Elixir more and what I think it is and what it isn't, and why it always reverses. Yes. But I didn't finish by saying, so this story is actually was created as a kind of we don't know exactly how it was created, but it corresponds to the creation of what are called temple towers all across the entire swath of North China. They're called temple towers, and they are temples to Xuanwu, including the imperial city. The back two temples are the front ones. The front temples of the 13 temples, the 11 of them, are all to Guandi, the god of war and loyalty. The back two are to Xuanwu, and all across North China you have these temples to Xuanwu, and so when you do a ritual, you're doing a ritual from this set of plays. And you don't have a temple or an altar without doing rituals. Because that's what it is. That's what an altar is. So what makes an altar alive is that you do a ritual in front of it. So that's when I said everybody knew this story, I meant everybody knew this story.
Because everybody did those rituals.
Everyone was there. Everyone had, because what the tower represented, after the Mongols invaded, in the early Ming, in the first half of the Ming Dynasty is when all of these were built, and they were built as a wall to stop the Mongols and to see them coming from a distance. That's what that was about. So it is a great example of state religion.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm glad that the counter use of cultivating low Dantian, you think, oh no, of course, only for subduing demons and it makes you a slave. And again, this is one of the things which people often object about your presentation of things is, but now I've been doing this. Does that make me a slave? How dare you say that I'm a slave? And and this is actually the other thing is, people have been practicing these purified martial arts for 100 years or so, and a lot of people that I know most of their lives and so on. And whether it's what it was originally, they've evolved into something new or created something new, which isn't necessarily without value. I mean, we can debate that. There's quite a lot of things we can debate about Chinese martial arts, and one aspect of that is their current state with respect to mixed martial arts or modern martial arts, if you like. But certainly, some of the teachers I've met have skills which I appreciate. So yes, it maybe in other media you'll come across as more reasonable than sometimes you do online and occasionally written.
Oh, reasonable versus just the problem that it's actually not about my reasonability. It's about the process of establishing authority, right? Because it's like, well, hey, I'm making a claim. Are you going to engage with the claim? Mm-hmm. Right? Because I can't make the entire claim in a short phrase, right? So, my fundamental point, like one of the fundamental definitions of the Golden Elixir is its property of reversal. And what is the Golden Elixir? It's a meditation technique. Mm-hmm. It's also a ritual technique. So it's something that people will do together. It's also deeply, deeply, deeply individual. The fundamental concept of the Golden Elixir is that it is individually cultivated. I cannot give it to you. So if someone gives it to you, someone gives you a method and you just follow that method, you didn't get it. You became a slave. You actually have to do the cultivation. Do you see where I'm going with this?
That makes perfect sense to me.
And so, I mean, for instance, we'll go back to the earliest use of the word quan in Chinese history that we have written down, right? Which is these plays from another play series called the Journey to the East, which is about the 8 immortals who are quasi-Buddhist Taoists. Like they're in the Taoist category, but it's a new Taoist category when this play is written. Mm-hmm. So, and they're each represent the Golden Elixir, like cultivating the Golden Elixir in a completely unique way, and it's a comedy. It's a fighting comedy. Mm-hmm. And all of these fighting comedies, we have the written version, it has its own kind of cleaned upness and poeticness, and then we have the kind that was performed after dark, which was sexual and more violent and all those other things. And that's what made it to Shaolin, as the first form recorded at Shaolin was one of the drunken immortal fighting quan, or a quan in this sense means a choreography. Mm-hmm. Theatrical choreography of a drunken immortal. We don't know which immortal. Maybe they used the style to represent multiple immortals. That's how some of them have come down. Those forms have come down to us today, but we don't know. But that account of tying the Golden Elixir to fighting is documented as early as 1540. In that book, and you can easily go back further. You can go back right to the beginning of religious Taoism if you're actually talking about invulnerability to blades.
So just talking about words now, you say that was the first use of the word quan, and it's 1540.
Fist, yeah, quan, yeah.
Yeah. So were martial arts referred to in any other way?
Oh yeah. Well, okay.
What characters were used to refer to fighting skills?
Yeah. So we don't have this. We can't actually have this conversation because we don't have. We'd have to settle on the word, and then the word would just be like I'm not making a claim about this being a beginning.
Okay.
No. I'm just saying that if we are going to look at that particular concept. Mm-hmm. It has an origin, but there's no beginning to martial arts.
No, of course not.
So I can't have said martial arts come from theater, even though people keep saying I say that. Um, I can't have said that because there is no beginning. I mean, I think one of the things, by way of introduction, that people often don't get about me is that I spent a lot of time in the early 20s. I was studying martial arts really deep, Chinese martial arts really deeply, but I was also dancing. And it was a time where San Francisco was the center of what was called ethnic dance or folk dances from around the world. But ethnic dance the word doesn't mean this, but the word just means people. But it referred to dance traditions in depth. Many of these dance traditions got kind of codified along with this at the same time as the Ymca Consensus was happening in China all over the world, because there was this, we'll call it fascism, or a kind of nationalism that swept the entire planet. And one of the characteristics was to get the character of your people in your country, your nation, into a dance or into a kind of dance or into a series of dances. Dances were often used to, like, you'd have people who were experts in performing the dances from different regions, and there would be a kind of dance of unity or dances of unity, or you'd bring dance companies from all over and dance together. This is a worldwide phenomenon. And so I got to sort of encounter the expertise of that maybe a generation after, in San Francisco. And one of the things that was just obvious, utterly obvious, is that the dance traditions from all over the world, and most dance traditions have some martial arts in them.
Yes.
And so when I experienced that, I started looking at Chinese martial arts and going, this is a dance. This fits better in the dance category than it does. If you acknowledge that most dances have fighting in them, it's just a story that's changed. I can fight. Look at the average person. If you can fight using the waltz.
Yeah.
Waltz, it moves your center of mass. It keeps you aware of the space around you. It teaches you how to have a solid frame. It teaches you complex footwork. It teaches you how to find openings. It teaches you it teaches you how to handle spinning with another person, right? It's a lot of really good self-defense material, right?
Yes.
If you can fight, let's just say you're from the other side of the tracks. You're that tough guy who grew up fighting, right? You can fight with the waltz. Actually, you can fight with the waltz more easily than you can fight with Tai Chi or Baguazhang.
Yeah. No, I don't have a problem with that. It brings us though to the kind of the really painful question of Chinese martial arts or martial arts in general, which is,
let's do it.
I do this martial arts, so I must be a good fighter. And it took me a while to work out when I started teaching I felt like I was making some people just worse, because I was taking away natural responses and making them try and pick the right thing to do when the right thing is, who knows what the right thing is. And
it's contextual. It's contextual. Yeah. And that was a difficult thing for me to work around. I could point to certain things which are like, okay, it's not exactly that you have to do this, but think about frame or become more aware of your body weight and so on. But actually, when you start teaching technique, then it can really go sideways quickly. People end up trying to fight the way they think they should fight, and it just, I call it martial arts disease, especially if like, okay, now I'm going to use my Qijuan, and it's like, it has to look like this, and my Bongchuan has to look like this, and I'll start walking around people, and just like, yeah. So, but you understand, I mean, that I solved this problem, right?
Yeah, I think
my book solves this problem. If you actually understand the history of the arts, you don't get stuck there, because you know that when you're doing Baguazhang, you are performing the dance of Naja fighting dragons, or flaying himself, or riding wind fire wheels. And that it doesn't mean you can't fight with that. You absolutely can. But you also know that the reason you have your hand like this is not just to taunt someone to grab your fingers, and not just because you can do a full face grip or whatever it is. It's because this is a word across all of Asia, from India to Korea, China, Japan, everywhere. This is a word, and it means thunder. And the word thunder also means vajra, which means unstoppable power and invulnerability. It's a magic mudra, and it's part of a storytelling tradition.
Okay, so that brings me to a topic which I'm very curious and fascinated by at the moment, which you say, this is a word, this is part of a storytelling tradition, and you can connect it to different, it has certain meanings in certain contexts and other meanings in other contexts, but basically you're going, this isn't just a hand, this isn't just a means of technique, it has a symbolic value which connects back to stories which then have other symbols in them. And for me, what I'm curious about, which may have nothing to do with martial arts, may have nothing to do with fighting, but then again it might, because it's about intuition in a way, is you're talking to my snakes.
Yes, I know you're a snake guy, and that's snake technique for those who don't know it.
Is you're creating a set of personal meanings with which you can interact with the outside world, so that you'll see something which objectively doesn't mean anything to anyone, but subjectively to you because of the work you've been doing in terms of, this body movement means this, or the sky symbolizes this, and birds symbolize that, and whatever. And you see a bird and you go, it's telling me something. What's it telling me? Boom. And then you have some kind of insight awareness, and it takes you out of the kind of logical linear thinking which we can easily just become robotic in.
Hey, let's not diss on linear thinking, man. It's a treasure.
Yes,
up front, it's a treasure, right? But I also agree. It's a kind of straitjacket that we want to let go of, and certainly, it limits creativity, right? And I see these as creative, expressive arts, and you're asking we actually talked about this, is what we were going to talk about. So, and I'm like, first of all, I should just say, my book represents about 10% of what I have to say about the subject, and I felt like this is the introduction. I've got to get this out here. And there's lots of stuff like, what is the collective unconscious? Like, how is it? Because thunder, right? This is also, it's not. I mean, often represented by a hollow ring, an empty ring, right? Which has the same properties in China and India as Thor's hammer in the Norse mythology, right? Only you can lift it, right? And then you throw it, it comes back to you.
Has a ring on the handle too.
Well, there you go. So, yeah, and one the other part about thunder, right, is that they often have a damaru, which is this is actually the sign language for damaru, which is a double-headed drum, which in Tibet, of course, is made with two skulls, back to back, right, which is totally intense, right? It's just a death practice, right? A lot of this is death practice. Obviously, it's martial arts, right? And so they have the early iconography of these damarus on a little stick that look like hammers. If you can't see the little swinging mallets, it looks like a hammer. And they often have a stake, which was for killing snakes or dragons. And you'll often see Garuda, who's the king of the eagles and the protector of the Buddha, will also be carrying this. So the iconography got a little bit mixed up. So what was a damaru became a hammer. It's not hard to see, is what I'm trying to say, how these things are connected. The damaru is in fact the ring, which if the thunder cosmology is the the ring represents the empty space between the thunder sound and the lightning action, which is like a vacuum that, you know, that feeling like it just sucked in and went boom. That's the emptiness by which you fight. That is the most efficacious for exorcism and fighting in the Chinese religious worldview. And why is emptiness so important? Emptiness is so important because if you can maintain your emptiness, which in the physical practice, this is kind of resilience, right? But it's actually emptiness. It stops you from being possessed. And what do you want to stop from being possessed by? Well, the spirits of the wandering dead, for the battlefield dead, who died in a state of hysteria and revenge. And what happens is they get in the grass, and then they jump to snakes or other creatures that have their bellies on the ground, and then from there they jump to humans. And so because snakes are often in trees, lightning strikes trees, and lightning is what thunder, the symbolism is how they're catching snakes. So this entire cosmology, again, that everybody knew, is completely built into this storytelling of the connection between hammers and thunderbolts and what Baguazhang is a dance about.
Yes.
I might have missed the question, but
No. It was so basically, you went
mythology,
collective unconscious, and prior to that, I went developing, I guess, your own, or researching symbols as a way of developing as a way of getting out of overly linear or uncreative thinking, as a way of having messages which come from the outside world in and out. So that, say, if you want to relate that back to collective unconscious, or unconscious is collective unconscious, what's going on the outside? Is it what's just happening on the inside? And having a set of symbols which mean something to you is that language of communication, if you like, because my unconscious or my deep mind or whatever it is doesn't just talk to me in a deep voice and go, anyway, today the correct thing for you to do would be this. I know it may happen like that to some people, and in some circumstances, like what's his name, Joe Simpson touching the void, falls off the mountain in South America, gets left for dead, breaks his leg, falls into a crevice, crawls out of the crevice, crawls back, and he's got this voice in his head telling him what to do all the time. Yeah. And it's clearly a disembodied voice, and presumably part of himself, but maybe it's part of something else too. But it's outside of those extraordinary situations, how do you have a method of communication with those parts of yourself which are less obviously conscious? And I think the attention to body and movement, but also connecting it to various kinds of symbols, is one of the ways which people do this.
Yeah, it's such a big topic, right? Because we've got this category called mythology, we've got this category called religion, which is like what isn't religion is religion, and the West always frames it as belief, and nobody, not just the West, just Christianity, nobody else defines it that way. So then you're like, well, what is not religion? And then over here you have mythology, religion, something else, but a collective unconscious, right?
Yeah,
it's another thing, right? So where are we in that, right? And so I thought of an example, a Baguazhang example, that so one of the things I say in the book is that once you understand that, and I go through all the things that define Baguazhang uniquely, they're unique about Baguazhang, circle walking, mud walking, the specialized weapons, the open palm, what else? Dragon and snake movement, and improvisation. And I show that all of these things, when we investigate them, and many others, line up perfectly with the Naja story,
Mm.
which comes from canonization of gods, of the gods.
Yeah.
And so, and then I go on to say, it's like that would be, again, that would be obvious to someone in that time seeing that movement, because it is language. That kind of stuff is language. They would see it and they'd recognize, and the reason they'd see it is because everyone knew that play. It was probably even more popular in many regions of the North than the Monkey King story. And by the way, we're talking the Beijing region, and Beijing's other name was Naja City because it was built on the shape of his body. And in the popular discourse, the person who wrote the book Canonization of the Gods, with Naja as the hero, actually was the architect of the city. So that, again, everybody knew that, and that's nationwide, right? That's the whole country of China knew that.
So at what point did Beijing start becoming a North capital and stop being Naja City?
No, that's just slang. It was always the North capital.
Right.
It's just again, it's like
Are you going to be using an analogy?
I was going to try to analogy you. Thank you for catching me. You kind of got to trust me on this. There are several books on the complete history of Beijing, and they make it quite clear that everyone understood it both as the North capital and as Naja City.
Okay.
So I was gonna get to is that then I say, okay, look, this is a theatrical ritual culture. Everyone there is involved in theatrical ritual. There's no such thing as like Confucianism in the sense of separate from religion. It did not exist. That's a 20th century fantasy. And so everyone's involved in this. And then, I'd say, okay, so given all of that, and given that everyone knows Naja, what is this thing? It's part of some ritual. I don't know what ritual it's part of. If you give me a team of 10 researchers and $100,000, maybe $200,000, I can show you 60 rituals that are likely candidates. That's the problem. It's so common, these types of rituals with Naja in them, that it would be hard to figure out which one what was unless we could tie Deng Haichuan, who we can't even for sure tie to Baguazhang, unless we could tie him to that ritual, right? And it's possible that the movement practice itself was tied to a whole bunch of different rituals. That's also a possibility. Because why not? If you're a movement master and you're a ritual expert, why can't you do different rituals? In fact, that would be the norm, that you would be able to do different types of rituals with that physicality. And that's that body language, right? So I point out 5 that I think are really good fits. And then a 6th one, which I say is not a good fit, which is this is one of the things Ben Judkins just completely missed about my book. He somehow says that the 6th one, which I said was not a good fit, is not a good fit, which was just, I was like, what?
Okay.
I can't believe you said that. And so the 5th one is this whole idea of the Baguazhang, which is a rebellion, and that definitely had martial arts in it. But there's no direct evidence that the Naja story is connected to this.
Okay, so that's the 6th one you're talking about now.
What's that?
That's the 6th one, which doesn't have a...
Right, which doesn't. But what I point out is if you look at the whole scope of rebellions, there are tons of them that have Naja rituals in them. Lots and lots of rituals that have that, because Naja means rebellion. If you actually just put the word Naja into Google, it'll say rebellion, rebel. Right, so it's like, of course they were doing that. But so anyway, I point to 5 that are likelihood, and again, it could have been 50 if you gave me more time. So if I gave myself 10 years instead of 3. So of these 5, one is Taoism, because although it's in many ways Naja characteristics are outside the scope of Orthodox Taoism. He's deeply associated with spirit possession, for instance. That Naja is a central deity in Taoist ritual because he is the marshal of the central altar and he controls the 4 directions. And every city in China had the altar for the 4 directions or the 5 directions. Since before written history. So the first, I mean, this is probably 2,500 years old at least. But those deities keep changing. So Naja doesn't become the marshal of the central altar till the Ming Dynasty, so about 500-600 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago. It's debatable. It's not documented well, but it's documented well enough that we know. And wasn't universal, but he certainly, you know, I'm just going to put a number on it. 70% of cities had Naja as the marshal of the central altar, and Taoists regulated that ritual altar, which was to the battlefield dead. That's where you fed the battlefield dead in your village, and it was also the center of the village. And so it's very possible that there was a local Taoist ritual in which they enacted Naja, a Taoist priest enacted Naja, invoking the gods of the 4 directions and their army. Each of them have an army of some tens of thousands, which are marshaled for doing ritual exorcisms and purifications and protection type things, healings. So all that being said, there's a key Taoist concept which has come into modern Bagua language, particularly in your lineage, which is Xian Tian Ho Tian. So the concept is that I'm doing the Golden Elixir, a version of the Golden Elixir all the time as a Taoist priest. And what that means is I'm externalizing time and internalizing atemporality. So Xian Tian means outside of time. It means completely spontaneous, completely available to, it's the place of absolute ritual potency. And this concept transcends Taoism. I mean, it goes into many different other cultures. This idea that there's a space outside of time that is where things are ritually effective, where you can change the way things are named, conceived, and perceived. And that's one of the in anthropology, that's one of the key concepts of what a ritual is. It's one of the ways that we've come to see the universality of rituals is that they have this atemporality, this liminal space, it's sometimes called. And so that's what Xian Tian means. And Taoists cultivate that absolute spontaneity, also sometimes called wu wei, not doing. And Ho Tian means inside of time, in a time sequence. So you have this idea that, for instance, that you're always visualizing where the North Star is and where the Big Dipper is spinning around it, right, as a kind of clock. So you always know where it is, and this is just one example. There are many, many ways in which the time itself is externalized. Ho Tian is externalized and Xian Tian is internalized. So you put your hat on in the morning, and at that moment, you know exactly where the Big Dipper is in the sky. Even if it's light out, you know where it is spatially, whether it's below you or above you, where it is. And then when you take your hat off at night, you know exactly where it is. And so this is just the act of putting the hat on and off is you are seeing, you're visualizing, because if you can't see it, you're visualizing where it is. But you're keeping track of time outside your body. Because that whole experience of everything externalized, all astrology, all commitments in life, all the things, the schedules you have to meet, the people whose hands you shake, those are all external. And Xian Tian is internal. So you're making, this is part of the Golden Elixir as a kind of daily practice. So when you're doing Baguazhang, or any martial art, actually, doing Baguazhang, so you're doing a form, or you're doing a routine, or you're doing a pattern even, in a simple pattern. That pattern is Ho Tian. What you're actually doing is Xian Tian. You are being spontaneous. You are outside of time. And that's a kind of a key concept, I think, to actually really getting what it's about. And again, that's the stuff, when you separate religion from martial arts, you just lose that. It's gone. Even if it's just a concept that can exist without the religion in the Western sense, if you don't have that, it's gone. It's gone. But it's easy to reclaim as well, as part of my point about my book. It doesn't. It deepens your practice a lot.
Yeah, I think we have this intellectual idea of religion as being something which is about explaining external and religious practices, external forces in the world, which you can do it. But I think we lose the sense of religion as a method of transforming your momentary experience of the world. And again, whether that means that the crows talk to me and I understand trees or the shape of a cloud, but basically from moment to moment, the sense of being connected to a bigger pattern, and the bigger patterns may have some cultural, or almost certainly have some cultural shapes to them, unless there's this universal collective unconscious which we can talk back to. But yeah, seeing practices as a way of transforming your experience, not as a way of explaining the outside world.
Yeah, that is, you kind of nailed it. It's kind of my fundamental argument, which is that I don't think you can actually understand the history of martial arts unless you practice them. And that's like, a lot of people are like, no, you can't. You can certainly contribute to the study, but I think you have to be somatic about it. I think you have to get into what the experience is. There are some wonderful scholars who study, say, the Golden Elixir, for instance. I've done these really detailed translations and stuff. I'm like, yeah, but it's so many things that you're going to miss if you don't have some experience of it. You know, like, I got into the discussion about how all these different categories with a scholar about how these different categories of Golden Elixir got created, and I'm like, well, you think about it, in the Ming Dynasty, I mean, come on. Like, some people think 70% of literate people were practicing the Golden Elixir. It was really it was like part of everything. It was integrated into art. It's integrated into theater, and this whole particular approach to visualization and reversing the order of perception action, which, at least that's how I'm defining it. And but it's broad, people were doing it their own way. But if that was happening and you were positioned at a Chuanjian temple, Taoist quasi, with Buddhist elements temple, as the expert. I mean, okay, so that's the whole thing. Chuanjian is basically two practices from Taoism: sitting and forgetting, or sitting still, stillness practice, and the Golden Elixir just extracted and turned into a temple, turned into a mountain retreat center. I could talk about this a lot more. It's more complex than that.
So just as a little, I guess, side note, Chuanjian is also where a lot of people say Dong Hai Chuan got the ideas of circle walking from.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's just post Cultural Revolution ideology. Like, there's no evidence for that. Zero.
Okay.
And so especially since it's more likely that the circle walking, that if there really were some guys, it was more likely that they got that from Buddhism anyway. So the point, and there's plenty of circle walking in Taoist ritual, and the whole point was to sidetrack. There's this statement in one of the tombstones to Dong Hai Chuan, which we don't even know if they're authentic, that mentions someone with a yellow crown, and yellow crown is a slang term for a Taoist priest, not a Chuanjian monk. Of course, you could have a Taoist priest at a Chuanzhen Monastery? Could.
Mhm.
But it doesn't tie it to the circle walking. None of that. That's just like layers of conjecture. Anyway, I totally lost my point. Chuanzhen. If Golden Elixir. If you are just talking about categories, so if you're looking at if you're an expert in the Ming Dynasty on the Golden Elixir, because it's your job basically, then people are coming to you and you're like, and they're all practicing. They want advice on their practice, right? Maybe they're monks. Maybe they're just people visiting.
Mhm.
It makes sense if you're going to write a book that you're going to go, okay, look, not everybody's Golden Elixir is the same. We already knew that.
Yeah.
But we can put them into general categories, and that might help you if you understand what category you're in, right? But from the scholar's point of view, he's saying this is the way it is. There are these categories, right? Which is, you see what I'm saying about practitioner view versus scholar view,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
The scholar sees the importance of the expert saying there are these categories, whereas the practitioner is going, oh, that's handy.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he's right. You know, like, kind of like that.
Yeah.
So do you think you have a Golden Elixir practice?
Do I think I have a Golden Elixir practice? I think I have something like it, but I wouldn't quite.
I asked the question because the last third of my book is about the Golden Elixir practice and its connection, its intrinsic connection to internal martial arts. So, and I know that you've practiced meditation of some sort, and so that would be the jumping off point.
Yeah.
Right, is to make the link between meditation practice and internal martial arts through a Golden Elixir practice.
Yeah, I mean, I could say from your description of Golden Elixir practice in the book, then a lot of the time when I'm circle walking, or I'm doing something which relates to what you're talking about. So one of the ways, for example, I think very similarly to where you talk about Shen being awareness of space. That's something which law talks about too, in a way, in that you have your 3 layers of practice, just kind of building your body, moving the intention through the body, and then the third layer is forget the body, just move in space. You don't have any particular form to follow. You just over there, over there, over there. And then I always think of, for example, circle walking as a practice is the awareness of space of the circle. It's going, I am not limited to just this bit, but all of that over there, that's me too, if you like, or certainly included, and not to get too caught up in just all of this. And equally, when moving with a sense of moving that space around.
Initiating from the space?
Initiating from the space, it's more like not disturbing the space.
Try it. Try initiating from the space.
And one of the things which just spontaneously I started doing many years ago and I focus on now, it's not exactly initiating from the space, it's simply being sensitive to the space and sensitive to the potential to move to any part of the space, which is not exactly the same thing, but from the martial perspective, it's, the contact is here, or the contact is there, or it's coming from here, so the body is free to go wherever. Completely different. What do you think?
Well, no. I mean, it's like everyone's in their process and they're in a different place, and then you're like, wait, is that what you call this? This is what I call that. You know, like there's that. Yeah, we're in a zone where, like, you know, you could be pointing that way, but it actually means this way. You know, but you know that thing where you're walking around a tree, right? And you look at the tree, and it's weird because now your perception shifts spontaneously, and the tree is turning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this weird, you know, I mean, no one's scared by it. It's just a weird illusion, right? But you now can use the tree turning to motivate you. You can kind of switch your perception action loops. There's an example of how it starts. It's a nascent form of that process that I'm calling the Golden Elixir. A major issue is, can you make your body empty of intent? So I understand why this is controversial, because it's not what other people teach, and one of the big problems was the way in which medicine, the modernization of Chinese medicine, then medicalized Chinese martial arts, and so people get stuck in this idea of pushing stuff through their body, which I define as external martial arts. So if your intent is in your body or passing through your body, that's called external martial arts. And internal martial arts is when you have your body's completely empty of intent. The intent is only outside. And that, in fact, if you want to move fast and spontaneously, that's actually the only option, I would argue. So it arises spontaneously when people do that, when they improvise and when they move fast. But of course, you could play with, I feel the inside my shoulder, it's doing this. You know, you could improvise from something inside, but you get this kind of emptiness. This happens in African dance too. When you're moving really fast, and you're learning a rhythm, right? And you're like, okay, I got the stepping pattern correct, right? But then you're hearing all this other stuff, and it's pulling you. It's actually pulling you off, and you're like, wait, no, I have to stay on the rhythm, right? And you're like, and your feet are doing this thing, and then you're like, okay, well, my arms are actually in a different rhythm, and these link up, right? It's a 4/5 or a 3/5. The Africans don't count it, but it's felt. But they line up. So 4 and 5 line up at 20. So you feel it, and then it locks in, and this other thing happens, and you're motivating it from someplace, and it might feel like the motivation is in your body, but to me that motivation, it's like an empty space. It's like I'm actually dancing this potentiality. It's not like a muscle or a bone in my body, because my whole body is moving, right? Yeah. It's sort of like an empty control space, and it's often like, if you're like,
no micromanagement going on.
Well, it's like not on the downbeat or the upbeat, right? I got the downbeat and the upbeat, down, down, down. Where is it? You know, it's like it's not on the downbeat. Like, what's motivating, what's moving it? It's in an empty space.
Okay.
So I think this is actually universal. It's not universal in the sense that every culture talks about it or transmits it, but that it's a universal human potential.
I've just read a book which I've enjoyed, and it has some qualities to it which, if you like, Golden Elixir, in that they turn some of my preconceptions upside down, which is Sand Talk by Ymca. So he's essentially aiming to look at Western culture through Australian Indigenous perspectives. And one of the main things in it, one of the concepts is that we think of objects and then we think of the relationships, but it's also the space between the relationships which you need to pay attention to. That's alive, as well as this bit, and the connecting part. And that sounds a little bit like what you're talking about. Maybe.
No, yes, yeah, I'm totally with you there. And I, I'm not, there's no reason to be a universalist, right? I'm just saying cross-train and cross-cultural train. you know, and because some things that are at the most advanced in Chinese culture might be the most basic in African culture, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah.
it's
Well, you said people who do Chinese martial arts should learn some African dance, and generally it's one of the things which I really notice is my girlfriend, I know this is something which you've been into, is into Lindy Hop and swing dancing. And I just look at the people who are dancing, and apart from the fact they're having a lot of fun, is just their footwork and their time and everything is often just way nicer than I see in Chinese martial arts. It's like, yeah. And equally with African dance. And I go, oh, yeah, it's there's a lot going on there, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if you got into the place in your Chinese martial arts practice where whole body unity isn't quite working, you know, where it's like, well, you keep breaking. Like, yeah, African dancers don't break; they stay a single unit. So it's a great place to learn that and then take it back. You know, that's something I would say to people, because. Yeah, I mean, one thing we didn't talk about at all is this idea that, you know, one of the things that the YMCA consensus did that's good, but also makes it really hard to understand the way things worked in the past, is it ended the caste systems, right? And there were actually lots of caste systems, and this is not very well studied. But the most well understood caste system is the theatrical caste, right? So you were born into it, or you were adopted into it. You were taken as a child or bought as a slave into this system, and you were trained and sponsored, and usually only had a first name. I mean, it was degraded caste, but they were also, I mean, the first 7 years was just physical training, usually in animal role specialist stuff, which is, as far as I can tell, is the origins of Jiu Jitsu, or at least Jiu Jitsu like material. It's all the ground fighting stuff in Chinese martial arts is all in that basic training of Chinese opera, which is, you know, which is now separated into acrobatics and contortion, but was animal role training. And of course, the first thing you learned was bridges. You know, 5 minutes in a bridge and 1 minute in the center of the floor doing handstands, right? That's your front door. And they just beat you until you could do it, or loved you, whatever it was, but until you could do it. And then they started teaching you the animals. It's like, and nobody starts their martial arts there anymore, right? With the ground fighting, right? That was all the ground fighting and acro stuff, what came up front, and then you learned the martial roles. If you were, you know, you graduated. So a lot of the animal role stuff was being done by children, and some people stayed animal role specialists and became a monkey player or a piggy, you know, player, or snake expert. You know, there's a lot of snakes in Chinese theater. There's a lot of there's even a fish character in the fish essence characters. So like, and that was the basis for developing character, right? And in fact, that's their main training for singing, believe it or not, is actually you train the physical body. And then once you, because the body is like your echo chamber, like you still have to sing. But your main training is that can you really get your body to make all these different shapes, then you can make different kinds of sounds.
That doesn't sound like Western opera, though. Just in terms of, like, I don't know how it would work for our concept of what beautiful singing sounds like. Anyway,
these were not.
In effect, you could then tune it towards our particular aesthetic, but
it was based on ear training and repeating back what someone sung to you, right? So you can definitely find the parallels, but it's not an opera singer in the West learns Western classical music, which is its own thing, right? So that, and then physicality of, but the physicality of opera is very physical. It is very physical. Yeah. But anyway, the point I was making there is that was a separate cast.
Yes.
And so they were movement experts. I mean, they all learned fighting, and they lived a super dangerous life because they were at the bottom of society. You had to, just from the court point of view, and the court most of the time didn't get involved. Usually you were in some village and there's no court there. There's no, there's one magistrate per province, right? So there isn't, the law is local, and the law is headmen, and that's families.
Yeah.
Families are imposing the rules. And you are degraded caste. So if you get in a fight, it's not a self-defense situation. You have to be better than them so that they don't get hurt. Maybe they get humiliated, but they don't get hurt. They get broken because you break someone's arm, they just kill you, right? So you have to sit on their face or something and make a joke, and then you can leave.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They had to be master martial artists. That's part of the story.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things which is people talk about, Baguazhang, they're all bodyguards and Caravan guards, and so they must be spending the whole time fighting bandits. And actually, what it meant was that the bandits were their friends, and they'd say, "We're coming through today. Can you just," it was all about diplomacy and backhanders and knowing the right people, and not about, obviously, if they had to, they would have to fight, but that was last resort. And so first resort is diplomacy. And
of course. That's still true, by the way. Yeah. I mean, everywhere. But even with guns, right? It's still true.
Yeah.
But one of the points I make is that caravan guards were associated with Baguazhang and Xingyi because of the god Naja and Naja's 4 generals who were associated with the 5 elements, right? So Xingyi is also like Baguazhang, and Xingyi, especially Xinyi, was based probably on riding a single winged fire wheel, that whole chicken walk thing. Whereas Baguazhang is based on riding 2 wind fire wheels. And this, he's like Hermes a little bit in the Greek tradition. He's the god of messengers and caravan guards.
Okay.
So we know that one of the altars to Naja in Beijing was the Caravan Gallard altar. And we don't know what that ritual looked like, but we know that there were these, that what a caravan guarding company was, it was people devoted to the god, Naja, who maybe they were in the same family, that's possible, or you got in through other connections. It wasn't just like, I'm devoted. You had to have connections, but these altars were in different cities, and what you did was you were traveling between cities that had a Naja altar. So I don't know exactly what the ritual connection is, but the fact that everybody says they're connected and doesn't make the connection to the god Naja directly shows that severance that happened at the beginning of the 20th century, because the movement is so clearly tied to Naja. And the weapons too.
Yeah.
I convinced you. It sounds like I convinced you of that part of it.
Oh yeah, no. When you showed me when you were in Paris and you showed me the photos or the presentation you gave me, it's like we live in this world of conspiracy theories. So I have conspiracy theory radar a lot of the time, and I can understand how someone listening to you talking about this stuff is just like, he's a crackpot conspiracy theorist, but there are just too many links which are quite close, and it doesn't have the problem of conspiracy theories of everyone's trying to suppress it and it has to be kept secret. No, it's just like, okay, there's a lot of data points and they line up, and there's almost certainly something there because of it. And the story of the Ymca Consensus, it fits with my my experience of Chinese martial arts and to some extent of Chinese, or the clashes between that and aspects of Chinese culture. So yeah, no, basically you've largely convinced me about the link and how it was lost. You haven't necessarily convinced me that what came afterwards wasn't any good, but
no, I'm not making that. I don't think I'm making that claim. Do you think I'm making that claim?
Not exactly, but it's easy for people to read it that way or to take it that way. And you also make claims of, if you take it in the original context with this idea, it is better, right? Mm-hmm. Now, people don't like to be compared to, or to be on the wrong side of the comparison.
Oh, I was about to make an analogy. Oh no.
Don't do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good challenge. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I'm going to make an analogy. I'm just going to do it. So you're having a party, right? And you invite some people and they don't want to talk.
Yeah.
They just don't want to engage. So you give them a drink and you say, here, have a seat. You can just be like a poodle, or if you're in France, it's a pug. You just sit there and listen. But if you're not going to engage with what the history of the subject is, or what the deeper content is, I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. It doesn't mean, in fact, you may have as much depth as you can handle, or as much depth as you need, right? I'm not trying to say those people can't come to the party. To use a bad analogy. And I'll clearly offer them a drink, whatever they want. But it's not, but I'm also saying, look, we should be having this conversation about how incredibly rich these arts are, because we are almost certainly losing something by ignoring that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think there's definitely aspects which are lost by ignoring, and it's perfectly possible to have a happy practice without it. And you can you can have extremely rich and beautiful, amazing practice. One of the things which annoys me in a way too is Chinese martial arts. You go, oh, people do mixed martial arts, they're shallow. People go, Jiu Jitsu, that's just running around the ground. It's just that's not a real martial art. And it's like, no, they missed a point too. And so you can have a wonderful martial art which involves relationship with gods and mythology. You can have the martial art which is practice, which is purely sporting, if you like, sportive. I'm getting French now. And biomechanical, and the best way to get leverage on the joints, and the psychology of how to trick people into the position, and the strategy of passing guard or not passing guard and doing leg locks and all these things. It's all good. It's great. And I really appreciate people who can just look at other people and go, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. I think it's a great attribute. And people go, no, that's not how we do it. That's, sit in the corner of the party, make sure the drink is strong, but take away their weapons.
Give them fake weapons. But squirt gun, give them something. Give them a rubber knife. So one of the things I got into in terms of archetypes, right, is that there's all these trickster archetypes. In some ways, Naja is a trickster for sure. At least in the Taiwanese version of the as a possessing god, he shows up as a child. So he's super innocent, but he's super wise, right? And he's super vulnerable emotionally, but super powerful physically, right? He's got these paradoxical qualities. He he shows up to your ritual as a possessing deity today in these places. He shows up and then he might just start running away. Like he tends the habit of just running away. So you got to have all these toys and like things to distract him, like trying to control the deity by giving them distractions, you know, like give him a silk scarf to wrap around, or you know, give him you know, something to chew on or like to throw. Marble. I have this video that I linked to where it's like all about marbles. They've got him playing with marbles to stay there, and he's playing with baby powder. He's dumping it on people's faces and stuff. So there's a definite trickster element that is not so evident in the story line of Naja, but in the manifestation for sure. At least what we call the Southern traditions.
Yeah.
And the and of course I've tied I just re-tied Tai Chi to Johnson Feng, who is also a trickster and a sexual character for sure. Like he's, you know, he's associated with again with more with not with possessing people, but possessing the brush when people write. So with games, with improvisational games that were played by elites in their homes and by people in houses of prostitution. I don't know if we're ever going to get a stack of these books because nobody in China and no scholars in the West really want to take this on yet. But if the stuff still exists, there are probably stacks of, you know, improvised verse written in the name of Johnson Feng from whorehouses. It was a pastime, right? And so this character of Johnson Feng is incredibly. There's a major. What I'm trying to say is a major trickster element to the Chinese martial arts that was completely obscured by the 20th century. And and comic attitude, which again just resolves all of this baggage about, you know, who's more serious about fighting. You know, if you see yourself as a trickster, or you're bringing the trickster element to your mixed martial arts fight.
The popular fighters, the ones who do. Usually.
People like the theater when it shows up.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the redhead gay Conor McGregor?
Yeah, he does the theatre kind of mostly beforehand, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's definitely well, and he's the stuff he says. I mean, yeah. Obviously, Joe Rogan is the most popular podcaster in the world, partly because he is a comic trickster. He plays this dumb guy who's obviously really not dumb. You know, but can get really riled up about a fight. And I think this is one of the weird things about Tai Chi, right? It's like, and I was really hoping that in writing the book, I would open up a new window in people's practice. Open up a new window for all these people who've been practicing and were just a little too serious, or thought they should be more serious than they were.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I used to go down to this meeting in middle of France when I was living in Taiwan mostly. And it was this great Tai Chi meeting. And it made me laugh most years. Because it would be lots and lots of people from around Europe camping around the lake. And then there'd be teachers who would teach in the morning and they'd push hands in the afternoon. And there was such a contrast because there would be two groups from England, Dan Doherty's people and Nigel Sutton's people, who were just like British people on holiday on the continent. So they get to France, they drive down exactly, it's like into the supermarket and they go, God, the beer's cheap. God, the wine's cheap. right? And every night till 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone's drinking and laughing and possibly fighting a little bit. But then all the other Tai Chi people are going, shh, quiet, shh, quiet. We're like, too much fun. But yeah, so maybe it's actually present in some schools of Tai Chi.
I think it is. I mean, the first person who pointed this out to me, I had a girlfriend. She was a dancer, and she'd gone on like a cruise around the world thing. I don't know. It was a thing people used to do back then, like a semester in college. And they had a Tai Chi teacher, and whatever it was, a Tai teacher was trying to be serious, but they would just make up funny names for all the movements, and they were just collapse in hysterics. Doing it. They couldn't keep a straight face. They couldn't stand up even. They would be laughing so hard in their Tai Chi lesson. So she didn't learn any Tai Chi, but but still, I think that I mean, having a great sense of humor is a great way to diffuse violence.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it seems to me we ought to be promoting that in martial arts too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know not everybody has a sense of humor, but at least the kind of recognition of the ways in which at least social violence arises.
And in some ways, this is one of the sad parts of our current moment in history, where we have to be very careful what we say, in case we say something meant humorously, which is not to be laughed at.
Yeah, I think you and I probably disagree on everything, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't have a totally coherent, great conversation. And when I say everything, I mean exactly 0.5% of the entire world. Like, it's a tiny thing that we disagree about, but it's like what everybody's emphasizing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Like the conflict. What is actually at stake in the conflicts in our internet world is this tiny thing that's been blown up out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can talk around it and never come near it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to say.
And the other thing is, possibly if we talk about it, this tiny thing could be a big thing as well, because I think some of the things we're talking about take up a lot more of their life than they take up of ours. And that's one of the issues. On the other hand, how we talk about it. We can talk about it differently, and we would probably get a little bit further.
Well, and I mean, I guess that's
plenty of things which I would like to see resolved.
Well, and sure, but I guess another way to say that is that I think martial arts are a type of communal ritual.
Mm-hmm.
That the fighting is just part of it.
Yeah. Sure,
fighting, but also meeting as people who are good at taking care of other people's safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that the healing, I don't like to claim to be a healer, but in fact I don't. As a Taoist, all healing comes from the Tao. But it happens, healing happens when you engage when you hang out with people who know how bodies work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's just, it's, and that's one of the absolutely amazing fruitions of all of this, for sure, is that we're experts, right, on how these things work. And that doesn't have anything to do with fighting. We were tricked.
Yeah. And I think it's a great trick if you can get someone who really wants to fight all the time and trick them into doing martial arts, and to the point where they go, oh yeah, no, I'd rather just laugh.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I thought I'd ask you, there was supposed to be this conference tomorrow in Marseille on martial arts and religion. Okay. Obviously, nobody's going to the conference, but it is happening online. Mm-hmm. Did you hear about it?
You may have mentioned it, but it's one of those things which Gone.
Yeah. It's one of these weird problems that the academy seems to be failing again to engage the broader world. Repeating the same mistake over and over, I think, because it's so relevant to so many people, but in so many different cultures. But it's just not being, it's like they're leaving it up to us to do the hard work. They're hiding in their ivory towers, I guess. It's a strange thing. What else did I want to bring up? How I know you were doing CrossFit for a while. What's you're done with that? Did somebody?
Because I haven't told everyone. I'm not exactly done with it. I'm still coaching at a CrossFit box because it's good regular pay, and the people are lovely as well. We're talking about community and so on, and being with people and bodies and so on. It's I love great people willing to work out or work hard, sweat, and encourage each other, and that's a great atmosphere to be a part of. People come, they change their bodies, they change their lives. Nice.
Yeah, we have something to learn from them for sure.
Yeah. But yes, I want to ease my way out for a couple of reasons. Partly because my kid is now leaving Paris, which frees me up to go elsewhere if I want. So having to be dependent on local work, if I can avoid that, that's great.
What else is there anything else exciting happening in Paris these days?
Anything else exciting happening in Paris? I'm sure there's plenty of exciting things happening in Paris. I just sold some snakes. That was quite exciting.
No, go ahead. Talk about snakes.
No, snakes are just a habit I picked up when I was 8 years old and got bitten. And then I've just been curious and fascinated ever since.
Wait, you actually got bitten, or you metaphorically got bitten?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, I was an 8-year-old in Kenya, and people started giving me snakes, and then one day one of them bit me, and it was a little bit scary. My mother was filming at the time, and I had a little bit of the film there. It's like, this person is trying to get the snake off my arm. Anyway, afterwards I had, I guess, checked under the bed when I got back to England for snakes. Not many snakes in England. But then I discovered it was possible to have pet snakes. I really wanted to have some. And so I pestered my mother until she went, okay. And they've been fascination since.
So you did you get all the snake references in Kill Bill?
Probably, but it's a long time since I've seen it. Maybe there's some things I'm not getting, but there were mambas and various other.
Yeah, they all have snake names.
Okay,
but that last palm technique, right? The final palm technique is actually a snake metaphor too, because there's a snake. There's in the final Kill Bill set, the second one, Carradine smacks, gets hit by the palm, the 5 steps down palm.
Yeah.
And he's like, he has to, as soon as he takes 5 steps, he dies, but he can wait until he's taking the 5 steps. So it's this great drama. But there's actually a snake in China called a 5 steps down snake.
Okay. There's in Taiwan, and it's a totem snake for some of the southern tribes, like pre-Chinese tribes in Taiwan, is called in Chinese a Bible 100-step snake. And it's an amazing snake. It's really beautiful.
Cool. Yeah. So it's that same. Yeah. So you get it. Yeah. I think it's fascinating. I'm not a snake guy exactly. I'm definitely not a snake guy. But I used to go and watch all the snakes as a kid. There's a lot of snakes in museums and such in around San Francisco where I grew up, and these are always garter snakes too.
Yeah.
Used to catch. And the really, really poisonous snakes behind glass as a kid, we just loved that. Alligators too.
Yeah.
and I used to get to hold the boa constrictors. There was a like kid petting zoo kind of thing. They had that, and then they got a giant python.
Mm-hmm.
And that was cool. Actually, I had a girlfriend that was babysitting a python at one point, and I'm like, "You better close that door because that's a cold-blooded killer in there."
There's some YouTube videos of I don't know where he's from. Maybe he's English, he's American, but he has a couple of pretty large reticulated pythons, which he films regularly with his daughter, who started playing with them when they were quite small, and she was pretty small, and they outgrew her by a long way. She's like 8 years old, and she's got this 80-kilo python, just like she's lying on it. But obviously, this isn't for everyone. Her father is watching. Father is taking care, making sure there are no cues of child snake together, or child food snake together. Because that can go horribly wrong quite quickly.
I had a student who's he's a doctor, and he was talking about. Well, I think they had some snake incidents, and they decided to bring in a snake expert after the fact to lecture everybody on dealing with snake poisons and stuff in California. And this guy's story was that the guy was like 70 now or something. That when he was like 10, he saw that you could order snakes from a catalog. Yeah. And without telling his parents, he just ordered, and it was like he ordered like a black mambo or something, like something completely poisonous that you no longer can order that stuff anymore. And then I guess he got bit too. Like it was some really bad story. But then it was similar to you. He got hooked, and he's always been a snake guy. So.
Oh, you've frozen. Okay, nearly froze. I'm going to tell you, because this will amuse you, one of my favorite snake stories. There's a man, I think it's in America, he's walking in the woods, he sees a snake, and of course, he's walking with a gun, presumably a rifle or shotgun of some kind, and so, it's a snake, so he has to kill it, but rather than waste a bullet, he decides to crush its head, and that leaves the rest of its body whipping around happily, including the tail, which coiled around the trigger. So, yes, he was shot by a snake.
Whoa.
Yeah. So let that be a lesson. That's like, is that an analogy? Maybe. I don't know. But it's, well, basically, people in America who die of snake bite, most of them are either drunk or hassling snakes when they shouldn't.
Yeah, actually, I was doing a backpacking. I used to take a lot of kids in backpacking, a lot of high school kids, youth at risk and stuff, which I was myself at a time. Anyway, somebody at some point assigned me to get all the latest updates on research on snake bites and stuff because where we were going. And so I did a bunch. This is before the internet. I did a bunch of research, and it was like, most people who get bit by rattlesnakes die because somebody tries to cut it and suck the wound and it gets infected. Very unlikely to die from a rattlesnake unless it's a baby one and it bites you on the head. That's bad. Anyway, that's what I learned. No, we could talk snakes more, but I just want to make the connection for everybody that we both practice Baguazhang, and the movement is based on snakes. And I would even add that, because I've studied with Pauly Zink, and he has this type of Chinese opera, Daoyin, right, which combines the Golden Elixir with the animal role specialist training. That there's dragon movements and snake movements, and they perfectly correspond to Baguazhang stuff as well. So you can really see those tight links in the cultural perception of what a human looks like when they're being a snake or a dragon, and that it's not. And so I kind of use that in a sense to like prove that what is sort of obvious to us, right? that bagua is representing those animals, or those imaginary animals, or those animals imagined. And so, yeah, we've cultivated a relationship to snakes. Anyway, it's a pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you so much for this chance. Let's chat again.
Yep, let's do it.